Women caste and reform. Next, have you ever thought of how children lived about 200 years ago? Nowadays, most girls from middle class families go to school and often study with boys. On growing up, many of them go to college and universities and take up jobs after that. They have to be adults before they are legally married, and according to law, they can marry anyone they like from any caste and community, and widows can remarry too. All women, like all men, can vote and stand of election. Of course, these rights are not actually enjoyed by all. Poor people have little or no access to education, and in many families, women cannot choose their husbands. Next, 200 years ago, things were very different. Most children were married off at an early age. Both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife. In some parts of the country, choose death by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Women who died in this manner, whether willingly or otherwise, were called sati, meaning virtuous women. Women's rights to property were also restricted. Besides, most women had virtually no access to education. In many parts of the country, people believed that if a woman was educated, she would become a widow. Next, difference between men and women were not the only ones in society. In most regions, people were divided along line of caste. Brahmans and considered themselves as upper caste. Others, such as traders and money lenders, often referred to as Vishyas, were placed after them. Then came peasants and artisans, such as weavers and potters, referred to as Sudharaj. At the lowest run were those who labored to keep cities and villages clean or worked at jobs that upper caste considered polluting. That is, it could lead to the loss of the caste status. The upper caste also treated many of these groups at the bottom as they were not allowed to enter temple, draw water from the wells used by the upper caste, or bath in ponds were upper caste bathed. They were seen as inferior human beings. Over the 19th and 20th centuries, many of these norms and slowly changed. Let us see how this happened. Next, working towards change. Next, from the early 19th centuries, we find debates and discussions about social customs and practice taking on a new character. One important reason for this was the development of new form of communication. For the first time, books, newspapers, magazines, and pamphlets were printed. These were far cheaper and far more accessible than the manuscripts that you have read about in class 7. Therefore, ordinary people could read these, and many of them could also write and express their ideas in their own language. All kinds of issues, social, political, economic, and religious, could now be debated and the discussed by men and sometimes by women as well. In the new cities, the discussions could reach out to a wider public and could become linked to movements for social change. Next, these debates were often initiated by Indian reforms and reform groups. One such reformer was Raja Rao, 1772-1833. He founded a reform association known as the Brahm Sabha, later known as the Brahmo Samaj. In Calcutta, people such as Rai are described as reforms because they felt that changes were necessary in society and unjust practice needed to be done away with. They thought that the best way to ensure such change was by persuading people to give up old practice and adopt a new way of life. Next, changing the lives of widows. Rai was keen to spread and the knowledge of Western education in the country and bring about greater freedom and equality of women. He were about the way women were forced to bear the burden of domestic work confined to the home and the kitchen and not allowed to move out and become educated. Rai was particularly moved by the problems widows faced in their lives. He began a campaign against the practice of sati. Rai was well versed in Sanskrit, Persian, and several other Indian and European languages. He tried to show through his writings that the practice of widow burning had no sanction in ancient texts. By the early 19th century, as you have read in chapter 7, many British officials had also begun to criticize Indian traditions and customs. They were therefore more than willing to listen to Mr. Rai, who was reputed to be learned man. In 1829, sati was burned. Next, the strategy adopted by the Rai was used by later reformers as well. Whenever they wished to challenge a practice that seemed harmful, they tried to find and worse sentence in the ancient secret text. The sport that point to view the view suggested that the practice as it is existed at present was against early tradition.